Book 5, Wintertide. In Chapter 1, Mince, a young pickpocket in Aquesta, fails at stealing a purse and barely escapes, reuniting with his gang, led by Elbright. Meanwhile, Royce and Hadrian arrive in the city, freezing and exhausted, having rushed to stop Degan Gaunt's execution, set for Wintertide. They hire Mince's group to stable their horses and learn about Empress Modina's upcoming marriage to Regent Ethelred, a man Mince despises. They meet Albert Winslow, their noble contact, who informs them that Medford has fallen to the Empire and that Drondel Fields, where King Alric is trapped, is surrounded. Royce decides to return to Medford to check on Gwen, while Albert will infiltrate the palace and gather information about Gaunt's imprisonment. With Wintertide approaching and security at its peak, they must act fast. Royce warns that they only have one chance to break Gaunt out before his execution, setting their high-stakes mission into motion. In Chapter 2, Arista languishes in the dark, cramped dungeon, deprived of food and unable to track time. She hears other prisoners, including a man who prays for her, but Degan Gaunt remains silent. She clings to hope that Alric, Royce, and Hadrian will come for her. Regent Salder visits her cell, taunting her with news of the Empire's victories, including the fall of Ratibor and Kilnar. He confirms Hilfred's death and threatens to torture and violate her unless she reveals her accomplice. When physical abuse fails, he threatens the Barkers, the family who once sheltered her, promising to have them raped, tortured, and executed if she does not comply. Overwhelmed by fear and guilt, Arista finally gives him a name, Edith Munn, sacrificing an innocent to spare others. Salder, satisfied, accepts her confession, sealing her fate as a pawn in the Empire's growing power. In Chapter 3, Archibald Ballantyne resents his lack of power, watching as Salder and Ethelred consolidate control over the new empire. When Sir Brecton arrives, loyal only to Archibald, Ethelred offers him the title of Grand Marshal and the province of Melengar. Brecton refuses, citing loyalty to Archibald, which infuriates Ethelred. Seizing the moment, Archibald lashes out at the regents, threatening to turn Brecton's army against them and ally with King Alric. His bold speech unsettles them, but once alone, he realizes Brecton would never support a civil war due to his rigid code of honor. Despite this, Archibald feels victorious, believing he has forced the regents to respect him. He expects they will now offer him a greater reward to keep him loyal, and remains hopeful he will still gain Melengar, perhaps even more. In Chapter 4, Amelia is overwhelmed by the forceful Duchess of Rochelle, who insists on helping plan the Empress's wedding and securing Amelia's place in high society. The Duchess gifts her new clothes, jewelry, and a horse, and persuades her to attend the Wintertide Joust, suggesting she choose a knight to carry her favor. Later, Amelia meets Sir Brecton, who unexpectedly asks to carry her favor himself, swearing to defend her honor. Shocked but flattered, she agrees. That evening, she visits Modina, only to find a large mirror placed in her room. Modina cryptically states that she is waiting for her wedding day to die, believing she has no future, no hope, and no purpose after failing to help Arista. Amelia tries to comfort her, but fears Modina has truly given up. In Chapter 5, Royce returns to Medford and finds it in ruins. Gwen's home is destroyed, and he fears the worst when he finds a glove in the wreckage. His grief turns to urgency when imperial soldiers spot him and he is forced to flee. Escaping the city, he sets out for Winds Abbey, hoping Gwen made it there. With no horse or supplies, he treks through the snowy forest and discovers mysterious footprints leading him forward. Following them, he reaches a treehouse belonging to Rin, an elf Royce once helped. Rin gives him warm food and his horse, insisting Royce take it as repayment. Riding through a brutal storm, Royce finally reaches the abbey. Fearing another massacre, he rushes inside, only to find Gwen alive and safe among the monks. Overcome with relief, he embraces her tightly as the abbot chastises him for interrupting Vespers. In Chapter 6, Hadrian and Albert discuss ways to locate Degan Gaunt, but the palace prison tower appears empty, and only a few trusted individuals have access to Empress Modina, who is likely a puppet for the regents. Unable to gather more intelligence, Hadrian decides to infiltrate the palace by joining the city guard. At the recruitment station, Sentinel Louis Guy recognizes him, forcing Hadrian's capture. Taken before Regents Salder and Ethelred, Hadrian is given a choice: kill Sir Brecton in the Wintertide Joust or be executed. They plan to rig the joust so Brecton dies, removing him as a threat. Hadrian refuses, until an unknown man reveals Princess Arista is imprisoned and scheduled for execution. He then demands Gaunt's release as well, forcing the regents to agree. However, Hadrian must remain under watch in the palace, impersonating a noble knight until the duel, with no way out except killing Brecton. In Chapter 7, Arista endures starvation and isolation in her prison cell. Her deception about Edith Mon seems to have worked, as she hasn't been further interrogated. Meanwhile, Sentinel Louis Guy questions Degan Gaunt about the Horn of Gillandora, revealing that a search team sent to retrieve it has failed. Despite Gaunt's insistence that Ezra Haddon told him nothing, Guy makes a cryptic discovery and concludes Gaunt truly knows nothing. Weakened and delirious, Arista recalls her past, her mother's death, her father's love, and the loneliness that has haunted her. She and Gaunt finally speak, and Arista reveals that he is the true heir of Novron and that Ezra Haddon had been trying to restore him to the throne. When Gaunt suddenly asks about the horn, Arista suspects a trap. She tests him by asking for his sister's name, and when he refuses to answer, their fragile trust breaks, leaving them both uncertain if the other has betrayed them. In Chapter 8, Hadrian is introduced to Nimbus, the imperial tutor, who is tasked with refining his manners and appearance to help him blend into the court as a knight. Nimbus quickly deduces that Hadrian is not truly noble, but carries himself with confidence and honesty. He insists Hadrian adopt a more refined look, guiding him through a bath, grooming, and a wardrobe selection. As Nimbus teaches Hadrian the virtues of chivalry, they are interrupted by three knights, Sir Murthus, Sir Gilbert, and Sir Elgar, who attempt to intimidate Hadrian. Nimbus reveals their true purpose, to assess Hadrian's scars and weaknesses for the upcoming joust. When Elgar threatens Nimbus, Hadrian throws a towel in his face, asserting his defiance. After they leave, Nimbus finishes his lesson, emphasizing that the ideals of knighthood rarely match reality, setting the stage for Hadrian's challenge ahead. In Chapter 9, Royce finds Gwen safe at Wynn's Abbey, but remains uneasy about their future. Gwen urges him to leave quickly to help Hadrian, fearing he will die without Royce's intervention. Royce dismisses her concern, but Gwen remains troubled. Meanwhile, Magnus and Myron assist Royce by reproducing an ancient palace floor plan, which Magnus identifies as construction plans rather than a map. He deduces that the palace lacks a traditional foundation, meaning it was built on top of something else, possibly hiding a dungeon. Royce decides to take Magnus with him to Aquesta to investigate. Royce delays leaving, enjoying time with Gwen, but his peace is shattered when a messenger arrives with news that Hadrian has been captured and is imprisoned in the imperial palace. Before departing, Royce gifts Myron a horse from Gwen. Myron warns that happiness comes from moving towards something, not running away, foreshadowing Royce's struggles ahead. In Chapter 10, the Wintertide Festival begins with the Feast of Nobles, where Hadrian, dressed in regal attire, feels out of place among the nobility. He is mocked by Princess Beatrice, Prince Rudolph, and Sir Murthus, but Nimbus quickly comes to his defense, turning the insults back on them with sharp wit. At the banquet, Hadrian is seated with notable figures, including Sir Brecton, Duchess Genevieve, and Archibald Ballantyne. The regent, Saldur, fabricates an elaborate tale of Hadrian's knighthood, presenting him as a hero who inspired an army and was chosen by the Empress. The lie solidifies Hadrian's cover, but leaves him uncomfortable. Albert discreetly checks in with Hadrian, confirming their shared understanding of the situation. Brecton reveals that his brother Wesley, who once fought alongside Hadrian, died in service to the Empire, deepening Hadrian's moral conflict over the tournament. With no escape, Hadrian is forced to play his role, awaiting the deadly joust ahead. In Chapter 11, Albert rushes to his inn to write a message but finds Royce and Magnus waiting. Royce, concerned for Hadrian, demands answers. Albert explains that Hadrian is not imprisoned, but has been made a knight by the regents and is competing in the tournament, hinting at a secret deal. Meanwhile, at the feast, Amelia struggles with court life, feeling overwhelmed by nobles who look down on her. She rejects several knights' offers to dance, but finds comfort in Sir Brecton, who treats her with respect. She later gifts him her scarf for the tournament. Hadrian, still being watched, is confronted by Regent Saldur, who tries to manipulate him into working for the Empire. Later, Hadrian finds Nimbus beaten, and Sir Brecton fighting off knights Murthus, Elgar, and Gilbert. Hadrian helps turn the tide, humiliating them. Afterward, Brecton privately questions Hadrian's backstory, suspecting Saldur's story is false but leaves it unspoken, for now. In Chapter 12, Professor Arcadius arrives at the Imperial Palace to meet with Regent Salder, hoping to secure the Empire's future. He warns that Modina's bloodline is the Empire's only claim to legitimacy, and if she dies without an heir, the Empire could collapse. He proposes a fabricated solution, claiming she already has a child, a young girl, he has been secretly raising and educating. However, Ethelred and Salder reject the idea, uninterested in a female successor. Meanwhile, Royce spots Arcadius leaving and confronts him in his carriage. Arcadius explains his failed proposal and learns that Hadrian has cut a deal with the regents to free Gaunt if he wins the tournament. Royce reveals that he and Gwen are getting married, and Arcadius expresses doubt about Royce adapting to family life. Before leaving, Arcadius warns Royce that Merrick Marius, a dangerous figure from Royce's past, is working with the regents, raising new concerns. In Chapter 13, Mince, a street urchin, spies on a house on Heath Street, hoping to earn 5 silver for identifying its owner. The house, once belonging to Lord Dermont, is now occupied by a secretive nobleman with palace ties. Mince sneaks inside through the root cellar, eats food, and explores the house. He finds a magical robe that changes colors and appears to communicate with him, glowing in response to his questions. Despite the risk, he steals it along with some documents. Meanwhile, Royce reads the stolen papers and recognizes the handwriting, confirming the house belongs to Merrick Marius. Mince tries to hide the glowing robe, but Royce warns him the owner will kill him if he's caught. That night, Royce confronts Merrick, now magistrate of Colnora. Merrick reveals Hadrian was tricked into a deadly joust to assassinate Brecton and will be executed afterward. He offers to save Hadrian if Royce takes on a dangerous mission. In Chapter 14, Hadrian competes in his first joust at the Wintertide tournament, unexpectedly unseating Sir Murthus in his opening match. The crowd is stunned, and his reputation quickly shifts from underdog to contender. Meanwhile, Sir Brecton rides with Emilia's token and wins his round against Sir Gilbert, drawing attention to her and earning jealousy from the noblewomen. Elsewhere, Mince, a street orphan, brings a mysterious glowing robe to the Empress, believing it has healing powers after saving his friend Kine. Emilia allows him to present it to Modina personally. Though skeptical, Modina accepts the robe and is shaken when Mince expresses his unwavering love for her, revealing that the people of the Empire see her as their hope. This realization sparks something in Modina, who decides to take action. She asks her guard Gerald for a favor, hinting that she may finally step into her role as Empress. In Chapter 15, Hadrian's undefeated streak in the Wintertide tournament has made him a celebrity, though he avoids the nobles and prefers the kitchen, where he befriends the cook, Ibis Thinley. Ibis, concerned for Lady Emilia's happiness, asks Hadrian not to harm Brecton in their upcoming joust. Meanwhile, Emilia joins the court on a hawking expedition, struggling to ride side saddle. Sir Brecton rescues her from falling, and their bond deepens. Later, at the evening feast, Empress Modina makes a shocking public appearance, presenting Hadrian with her token, placing him on equal footing with Brecton. That night, Hadrian returns to find Merrick Marius waiting in his room. Merrick warns him that if he doesn't kill Brecton, he will die instead, breaking his deal with the regents and dooming Arista and Gaunt. Hadrian is left conflicted, realizing that his path is leading toward inevitable bloodshed. In Chapter 16, Hadrian prepares for his final joust against Brecton, avoiding encounters with Emilia, Brecton, or Merrick. Before the match, he reunites with old friends from Dahlgren, who marvel at his transformation into a knight. As the joust begins, both knights discover their lances have been secretly altered with deadly tips, revealing an assassination attempt. Instead of tilting, Hadrian halts, exposing the treachery. Brecton does the same, but both are arrested for treason under orders from Ethelred and Salder. The crowd erupts in protest, sensing foul play. Meanwhile, Emilia refuses to make Modina falsely denounce the knights as traitors. Regent Salder threatens her, demanding obedience, but she defies him, tearing up his decree. Enraged, Salder orders her arrest. With riots brewing outside the palace and the knights imprisoned, the Empire teeters on the brink of chaos. In Chapter 17, Arista lies weak in her prison cell, nearly unconscious, tormented by hunger and a rat she calls Jasper, which has begun gnawing on her foot. Just as she loses hope, Hadrian is thrown into a nearby cell, injured and bleeding. He tells her he came to save her but has failed. Soon after, Emilia is also imprisoned for refusing to have Modina denounce Hadrian and Brecton as traitors. Brecton, imprisoned as well, realizes the Empress had nothing to do with the accusations. Meanwhile, Modina listens to the growing riots outside, where citizens demand justice. Regent Salder orders her to give a speech condemning Hadrian and Brecton, but she refuses, enduring his physical abuse without reaction. At night, Royce and Magnus execute a daring rescue. Royce finds and frees Degan Gaunt, Brecton, Arista, and Hadrian, who is gravely wounded. However, when they reach their escape tunnel, Magnus is missing. In Chapter 18, morning arrives on Wintertide, and the prisoners await their execution. Hadrian, Arista, Brecton, Amelia, and Gaunt are weak and wounded. Arista, near death, begs Hadrian to kill her, but he refuses, urging her to hold on. Royce, searching for an escape, finds the dungeon sealed and Magnus missing. Meanwhile, Modina kills Regent Ethelred in her chamber, revealing she has been secretly listening to the regent's plans for months. Salder, realizing the danger, orders Luis Guy to kill her, but Archibald Ballantyne betrays them, fatally wounding Guy before being killed himself. Modina escapes into the palace and takes control. At the same time, King Alric and his forces arrive, having been summoned by Modina's message. They storm the palace alongside the northern army and overthrow the regents. Modina claims her throne, the people rally behind her, and the prisoners are rescued. Amelia tearfully realizes Modina has saved them all. In Chapter 19, Modina buries Deacon Thomas, reflecting on how his martyrdom shaped her destiny. She acknowledges that, despite his good intentions, his actions forced her onto a path that led to her becoming empress. She forgives him, but accepts that she is no longer an innocent girl. Back at the palace, Modina takes full control, working tirelessly to stabilize the empire. She appoints new officials, navigates political threats, and seeks to secure alliances. Nimbus advises her to balance power by rewarding loyal nobles and controlling opposition carefully. Reports arrive of refugees fleeing from the north, and Nimbus warns of possible pestilence or an unknown threat. Meanwhile, Hadrian, Arista, and Gaunt recover from their injuries. Just as things seem to settle, Myron arrives with an urgent message for Royce. Upon hearing it, Royce panics, realizing Gwen is in grave danger. He leaves immediately, warning Hadrian that they will never see each other again. In Chapter 20, Arista struggles with insomnia and reflects on her growing magical awareness and her love for Hadrian, which she chooses to keep secret. She senses a great shift in the world and recalls Esarhaddon's warning that something is coming. Modina visits her, revealing she has signed a formal alliance with Melengar. She gifts Arista Esarhaddon's shimmering robe, saying he would have wanted her to have it. Meanwhile, Degan Gaunt arrogantly assumes his role as the heir of Novron and boasts about marrying Modina to secure the throne. Modina dismisses his advances and later learns that Russell Bothwick of Dahlgren has arrived at the palace gates. Excited to reunite with her old friends, she rushes outside but is ambushed by Royce, who apologizes before taking her. By dawn, the palace is in chaos. Modina and Salder are missing, guards are dead, and Hadrian realizes Royce has executed the Queen's Gambit, capturing both the Empress and Bishop. In Chapter 21, Royce exchanges Salder and Modina for Gwen on Langdon Bridge. As they pass, Gwen breaks into a run toward Royce, only to be shot with a crossbow bolt. She dies in Royce's arms, whispering that he must hold on. Enraged, Royce attacks the warehouse where Salder and Modina are taken, setting it ablaze. Trapped inside, Salder pleads for help but perishes in the flames. Modina is saved by Arista, who uses Esarhaddon's robe to protect them from the fire. Meanwhile, Hadrian, Amelia, and Brecton arrive, searching for Modina. Hadrian finds Gwen's body but rushes to the bridge, where he sees Royce hanging off the edge, contemplating letting go. In a desperate plea, Hadrian repeats Gwen's last words, urging Royce to hang on. The words jolt Royce back, and he reaches for Hadrian's hand, choosing to live.